Welcome to the first ever digital presenter workshop, and this is the topic for today, so that we can start talking about it. Just want to share, if you don't know who I am, I have Humberto Gurmilan, that's my name at the bottom, and I have a master's in communication, BA in communication, and an AA in journalism, and I spent 15 years in television and radio and doing other types of media. I've now 10 years teaching at a college level. I'm going to jump out one more time and let Samsung come in. And also have 25 years public speaking. The first time I spoke in front of a big audience was in high school, and I did it in front of 2,000 students at Montgomery High School here in the South Bay. And that just gave me such a great experience, and it made me realize how important it was to be able to communicate in public. And I'll share the video with you, but it'll take a little bit of time. So, but 25 years public speaking, that's quite a bit. It's really crazy to see and look back at how much time I've spent, and probably I've done some math. Obviously, it's not something that you can pinpoint 100% unless you have some sort of spreadsheet. But I probably have over 1,000 presentations done in all sizes of rooms, with 12 people, with 5 people, with 2,000, and so on and so forth. And obviously in television, I probably have thousands and thousands of people watching, which is pretty nerve-wracking if you're thinking about it. But anyway, that's a little bit of my experience, and that's where it comes from. I just love public speaking. I love communication, and I love teaching it because I think it's a huge tool and a huge resource for anybody that wants to enhance their career. If you want to enhance your presentation skills at work or at church or in the community, if you want to be a better leader, it just makes you such a I hate the word powerful, but I'm just going to use powerful. It makes you a lot more powerful in terms of the message that you can convey. So that's why I think that communication is so important. That's a little bit of my career with you guys. So what we'll learn today in the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to teach you a little bit about understanding nervousness, but specifically in digital platforms. Why it's different to do a Zoom call, why it's different to do a presentation on camera, because if you think about it, and you probably know that feeling because most of you have your camera off, and I'm not picking on you guys, but most of you have. So I'm gonna check to see how many of you have the camera on. Very few of you guys, and it's just the fact of having a camera in front of you, right? That just makes it. Hey, Alfredo, I see you guys. It's just the fact that having a camera in front of you makes it difficult and makes it different. But at the same time, it's very similar to public speaking in front of an audience. So I'll talk about understanding nervousness in digital platforms, because we're going to do this more and more. The pandemic and the fact that we were in shelter in place has just shifted things. Communication shifted to digital platforms. It's not going away. So there's going to be more and more instruction in the classroom. It's going to be hybrid in the future, especially at the college level and other parts of the world and other areas of the world. But also it's going to be hybrid, I'm thinking, and I will expect that in the workplace as well. A lot of places are closing their more brick and mortar locations, and they're going to remote working. So a lot of this is going to happen. So I'm also going to talk about organizing your presentation in the next few minutes, and then finally also some of the things that you need to know when you're presenting in a digital world, right? When you're in front of the camera, when you're in front of the computer or your webcam or your phone. Some of you are connecting with your phone. I'm also going to share a little bit of the things that you need to know and keep in mind so that your presentation, and even if you're not presenting and you're just on the computer or on the screen, how to present yourself nicely or properly in the camera. So we'll talk about that in a couple of seconds. So let me get going with a little bit of how to understand nervousness in digital platforms and why we need to understand it. If you think about it, we're not used to communicating all the time in digital platforms. And the digital technologies have made a big difference in our world ever since the smart device or the smartphone was introduced into our lives. We text a lot more, right? We use social media platforms to communicate a lot more. And we're using it more and more, but unfortunately, we don't use the video functions that often. It's more recently that we started using them. So some of you might be more used to using it. I certainly never use the visual part of the FaceTime or anything like that. Very seldom would I do that. I'd rather meet at a coffee shop and talk to somebody. But now we're kind of forced in a way. We were forced in a way to do this, and it's becoming more and more. So it's becoming more common. So that's one of the things that we need to understand. The reason why it becomes, like I was saying earlier, it becomes a little bit more difficult to do a presentation or to be on camera is because there's also less cues. What do I mean by that? When you're in front of well, mediated communication in general offers less cues. And what I mean by that is that you don't have sometimes facial expressions. So from you, I'm not getting the feedback that would normally get in a face-to-face interaction. So if I was in the classroom right now and you guys were in front of me, I would be, scanning the room, making eye contact with you. And then I would see you either, sitting up, paying attention, nodding, or you're on the phone. A lot of my students do that, especially the younger ones. It just depends, right? So, but I would be getting that feedback. If I say something, you would nod, you would give me a thumbs up or clap, right? Or raise your hand if you're confused. So in mediated communication, we have less cues, less visual cues, less nonverbal communication. So even in my case, I'm not able to show you my whole body, for example. I'm not able to move around in the room if I want to get close to the right side of the audience or the left side of the audience. So there are a lot of things that are different and more difficult when it comes to digital platforms. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but the cues are going to be much less cues. You're going to have much less cues in mediated communication. And again, mediated communication is going to be anything that is using a device to communicate. So it could be FaceTime, it could be Skype, it could be texting. Compare texting to what we're doing right now. Texting, how many times, and I'm going to ask you, raise your hand if you're on camera, raise your hand if you have texted with somebody and misinterpreted a text. I've misinterpreted, especially in relationships. If you have a relationship, a romantic relationship, and you're texting each other, and then, something is said, you don't have a smiley face or you don't have an emoji in the text, then you're like, uh-oh, this person is mad, right? So that's why we actually invented emojis. And if you're old enough, like I am, I'm pretty old. So if you're kind of my age, you'll remember when we started using the colon and then the parentheses to do the smiley face to text, because emojis didn't exist. And then somebody smart said, you know what? We need to create some emojis, some emoticons back then, so that we can express happiness, so that we can express anger and so on and so forth in mediated communication. So this is the whole idea behind less cues in mediated communication. It's also less personal, right? I much rather sit with somebody and have coffee and talk than do Skype. And I much rather do that or have a phone call and talk to somebody instead of, texting. There are certain things you don't communicate through text, right? That you have to do in person or by phone. Like the least personal thing you can do is call somebody and say, you're fired, or, hey, I don't want to be with you anymore, or, hey, I don't want to go with you. Those are terrible things, right? I hope nobody has, got one of those texts, like an actual text, like, hey, I don't want to see you anymore. That's horrible, right? So texting somebody and delivering a very personal message is just very difficult. It's not something that you should do, but it happens, right? But it's less personal. Mediated communication is less personal. And the final one goes with the second one, which is more ambiguous. We get enough information to have the conversation and to communicate with each other, but it's still very ambiguous. So that means we still don't get the full message. And Sylvia, do you have a question? Go ahead, and if you want, unmute. But yeah, it's ambiguous.
No, it was just I was showing my hand.
Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. No problem. Well, yeah, it's just more
ambiguity.
Well, thank you for raising the hand digitally, the emoji. That's what we need. So a little bit of how to manage the nervousness if you're going to present, because I think some of you are probably used to doing this now, but you probably still get a little bit nervous. And I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be completely honest, even with all the experience that I have, even with all the time that I spent in front of the camera. I did live shots on television. I've done presentations in front of 1,000, 2,000 students, 2,000 people, big events with doctors and all this stuff. Today, I was a little bit nervous, right? I was nervous. That's normal, right? So nervousness is an important part of public speaking. And I say important because it's actually a good thing if you start understanding it a little bit better. So nervousness is going to come just from the fact that you're not used to it. It's not something that we do very often. It's not something that comes natural to us. First, to be in front of an audience is a thing. But second, also to do it in front of a screen with people connected digitally, it's also something that's going to make us feel nervous. And that's okay. It's very okay to feel nervous. It's very okay to feel that little anxiety in your stomach, those little butterflies. You know, you have to know that that's coming because your body, it's coming because you're alive, right? You have a heartbeat. So that's good. Congratulations for having a heartbeat, everybody. That's a good thing. If you didn't have a heartbeat, you probably would not have nerves. Obviously, there's certain people that will not be nervous. You know, there's certain people that have done it for many, many years, and they're not going to be nervous. But you know, it takes time to develop. Some people are very talented and they know how to manage that. But just know that nervousness is good. It's your body getting you ready for an unnatural situation to be in front of an audience. So a lot of our nervousness, if you feel really anxious about a presentation, sometimes it's mostly because of lack of preparation, but also irrational thinking. Raise your hand if you ever, or if you remember a moment where you were called upon in middle school or in elementary school and you weren't ready, and you just felt really embarrassed to be, you know, in front of the whole group and everybody started pointing or laughing. Maybe not everybody went through that, but you probably felt a moment where you just felt horrible in front of an audience, right? Hey, Kike, thanks for raising your hand. That's a great, I mean, it's a great example. And that's, you know, that's because, and it's, his hand is way up high. That's awesome. Thank you, Kike. That makes us feel that those type of experience in our background and in our past are connected with the nervousness that we feel nowadays when presenting. You know, it's a very primitive part of our brain that's connecting to that feeling. And automatically, unfortunately, our brain makes it into a negative feeling, right? But if you think about it, and I want you to think about that moment when if you were ever in love or you're still in love right now, and you're thinking about that person or that family member you feel a lot of love for, you get those butterflies in your stomach. Maybe you're gonna go on a roller coaster, you get that feeling in your stomach, right? It's the same emotion. It's the same feeling of excitement, of your body releasing the adrenaline and getting you ready for it. But somehow our brain connects negative experiences to it. So the point here is that if you understand that that feeling of nervousness is just the body getting you ready and connecting to maybe a negative experience in the past, then you can try to flip that and say, okay, you know, that's here, that feeling is right there in the pit of my stomach. You know, I have to present in front of the whole group at work. You know, I need to do this. It's not bad. You know, it's just my body getting me ready. So have that understanding and, you know that with preparation, you could probably curb that nervousness and lower it. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But that same feeling is that same feeling you get in good excitement. And then finally, you know, like I said, you're alive. So I know this is a very brief explanation of where the nervousness comes from. And really, you know, it just depends on how much nervousness you feel. But a lot of this is going to be fixed when you prepare a little bit more. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But as long as you understand where the nervousness comes from, you can start kind of dealing with it because it's never going to go away. So accept it and know that it's coming from a good place. Actually, your body's getting you ready for that situation. So that's going to help you do that. Also, hopefully it helps to understand digital platforms and how you know, how it works and why it makes us feel a little bit, you know, more nervous than maybe, you know, maybe presentations in front of an audience. So it's just different. So how do you deal with nervousness? There really is no, if anybody out there is telling you that they know the secret to it, I think they're probably lying because everybody's different, right? And everybody has different experiences and their nervousness or anxiety comes from a different, you know, place. But some of the things you can do to prepare for a presentation that's on Zoom or it's in front of an audience is to prepare. You know, that's going to be the best way. Think of the test that you took in high school or in college or wherever, or even just the driving test. If you don't study for the exam, the chapters, you go into the test and you're going to be very, very nervous because you know you're not prepared, right? So that's going to exacerbate the situation. That's going to make it worse. So if you prepare and read for a test, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable. The same goes for a presentation. If you go over your introduction, if you go over your materials, if you go over all these things that you need to do, know who's going to be in the audience as well. You need to do that sort of work. That's part of the preparation. You don't want to go blind into a room or into a digital classroom or digital presentation location or whatever, and not know who's going to be in the audience, right? Is your boss going to be there? Is it a bunch of 12-year-olds? Is it 7-year-olds? Is it 50-year-old doctors? That's going to make a difference. So you have to think about your audience as well in your preparation, and that's going to make a big difference in the feeling that you get in terms of anxiety. So that's a really important one. Prepare. And unfortunately, when I teach my classes, when I teach my courses, that's the thing that most people don't do, because they don't want to maybe put the work in. But even just going over your presentation 2-3 times and working early and having it ready, that's going to make you feel at ease, or a little bit more at ease when you're going to present. That goes for presenting or recording a video. Let's say that you are recording a video for your business, or if you're recording a video for a class, or if you're recording some sort of video. If you practice the video 2-3 times, or recording the video before you do, you're going to be ready for that situation. It's like dancing. It's like a dance rehearsal, right? Rehearsing. It's going to help you deal with the nervousness a lot better. You want to accept the feeling. I talked about that. One of my biggest recommendations is change your attitude. Think positive about the presentation. It's a lot easier to think negatively, right, about public speaking, because most of us have some sort of fear or some sort of anxiety towards public speaking. So it's easy to say, oh man, it's going to go terrible. I'm going to, trip. I'm going to, drop my notes. I'm just going to, get that little squeaky voice, that I can't, and I'm not going to be able to breathe. You start thinking about that, it's going to make it worse. So think positively. Think, everybody there wants to listen to what I have to say. Everybody will gain something from my presentation. I'm going to do great. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to lose, money because, I guess if you're presenting and trying to sell, then you might lose money, right? But most situations, you're not going to lose anything, and you're not going to be hurting afterwards. It might be a very challenging experience, but I can guarantee you, if you approach it with a positive attitude, you're going to feel really good afterwards and feel like, okay, you know what? I did it, and I can do it again. Some people do it and then they're like, I'm not doing it ever, right? That's because that negative mentality, and that, no, they didn't have the positive attitude. And I know having a positive attitude is difficult, but if you work on it and you really mentalize or, think about it, and it can be a lot easier. And finally, I have the picture of the young lady there power posing. That's called a power pose. And I don't know if you've ever, heard about that, but there are studies out there that show that doing a power pose with body language, sitting up, shoulders back, smiling, chin up a little bit, doing that for 2 minutes will actually change the chemistry in your body, and it will make you feel more confident. It will make you feel like you can do it, right? What do we do? That's because the body and the mind are hardwired, and the emotions are hardwired, which means they're just directly connected to it, to our brain, our emotions are connected to obviously our body through our brain. So if you feel positive and do power posing, shoulders back, chin up, a little bit of a smile, what does that communicate? Confidence, right? It does communicate confidence. So power posing is really important. Now, you don't want to go and do that in front of the audience and just stand in front of everybody like Superman or like Wonder Woman. That would be very ridiculous, or maybe some people would find it funny and amazing. But I think the way to do it is to go into a bathroom before a presentation, or find a place where you can stand straight, shoulders back, hands on the waist, smile, take deep breaths, and say, you know what, this is going to go good. I'm going to do my best. My best is going to be good enough, and then I'll improve next time. But right now, I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to do very well. You do that for 2 minutes. It's almost like a self-pep talk. You're going to do a lot better than otherwise. So power posing is a thing, and I could talk about for a whole hour about power posing and those studies, and it's really amazing how the body is connected to. Just think about it. When you're feeling sad or you're feeling down, you shrivel up and become small, right? That's the same emotion. You become small and you kind of, curl up. But if you're feeling good, what does an athlete do when they win a race? They'll raise their hands. They make themselves big. It's that emotion of feeling powerful. And if you do that prior to a presentation, your body's going to react to that. So those are some ways, and there's a lot more things and a lot more tips that you can have. But these are some of the most important things that you can do, and they're easy to do before a presentation. It doesn't matter if it's in front of an audience or if it's in front of a digital group, kind of like what we're having today. But that's how you deal with nervousness. Now I'm going to say, if anybody has any questions up to this point, hopefully I'm not going too fast, but if anybody has any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat box, and I'd be happy to start answering some of them, so that I don't go too further down and then lose track of those questions. So, how to prepare. I'm going to give you some other tips. I talked about a little bit about nervousness and how to deal with nervousness, but I'm going to talk about some ways to prepare. And what happens is that a lot of us, when we have a presentation, we start, we don't know where to begin and how to organize our presentation. This is part of the preparation. You want to organize your presentation typically in 3 points. I don't have the research right now, but research says, or a lot of research, says that, or points to that 3-point, sorry about that, 3-point presentations do a lot better than otherwise. And I'll explain a little bit about that. So, and I'll get to your question, Paul, in a second. 3-point presentations go like this. You have to have an introduction, right? Where you have your name, where you tell people about what you're gonna, talk about, what's coming up and all that stuff. And I could break it down into many things, but all that you need to know is to break it down in 3s. The first point, maybe you talk about background, about what you're gonna talk about, a little bit of that. Second main point, you develop the first main point. And then the third point, maybe give people some pointers as to what to do. It just depends on the topic. But if you break down into 3s, people are more likely to learn what you're talking about. It creates retention for the audience. It helps people remember what you're talking about because it's 1, 2, 3. And then it's also going to help you have a roadmap, right? It's going to help you prepare because now you know there's only 3 points. So if you're in point number 2 and then you're like, oh my God, I lost my train of thought, then jump to point 3 because then you know what's coming up. So if you've ever seen any, posts on the internet or books that talk about 3 ways of doing this or 5, usually it's 3, 5, or 7. Those 3 numbers, 3 ways or 5 ways or 7 ways. For some reason, those odd numbers resonate more for people, for an audience. And you'll see a lot of books that do 7 ways of doing something or 5 ways. That's that psychology behind organizing it like that. If you think about it, we say 1, 2, 3 and jump. Right? We don't say 1, 2, jump. That'd be weird because we're so used to that. So the 3-point organization is very effective and it can be used for anything. It can be used for an informative speech, for a class, for anything that you're doing. It's a really good way of organizing. Now, obviously, the introduction and the conclusion are gonna be what keeps those 3 points together. So you have to have a good introduction, and then you also have to have a solid conclusion. Those 5 points are the most important. They're equally important. Each of these points, the intro, the main point 2, main point 3, and the conclusion, are all very important. I kind of, when I have this lecture in class, I always share that it's kind of like a sandwich, right? The introduction is the top bun, and then you have the toppings in the middle, and then you have the bottom bun in the conclusion. What happens if you don't have a top bun in your sandwich? It's gonna get all over the, unless you're doing like a low carb diet or something like that. But you get the point, right? If you don't have the bottom bun, then it's gonna be all the stuff in the bottom, falling out. And then if you don't have good main points like 1, 2, and 3, it's just gonna be bread. And that's not a sandwich, it's just bread. So hopefully think about your speech in these 5 points, but 3 main points. It's gonna make it a lot easier. Then, we can get into how to organize your main points. That's a whole different presentation. There's something to it. So let me get to a couple of questions. So I'm gonna, minimize the screen a little bit so I can see the questions. And Pablo's asking, when using Zoom and speaking to an audience, however small, it helps me to hide the audience's faces. That's a good way of not making eye contact, right? I think we have, one of the things that I always share is, the eyes are the window to the soul, right? So it's difficult to have all these eyes looking at us and have all these, faces staring. That makes it a lot difficult. So if you can hide the faces, then you're doing great. Now, the drawback of doing that is that you don't know if people are falling asleep. You don't know if people are there. If you need to do that and to get through the presentation, that's great. Do it because then, but eventually I would try to bring faces up. For me right now, I appreciate those of you that are on screen. And I know it's not always possible, but I appreciate it because I get to see feedback. So I see some of you nodding or raising your hand when I ask a question. And that's part of the engagement, right? That's part of the engagement. I'll talk about that, why you would ask at the beginning of a presentation in Zoom, or in Google Classroom or whatever, or, whatever platform you're using, you would ask him to say, if you can, please turn on, your video, because I would like to have a conversation with you. I would like to have a conversation with you. That's what I would do. Jennifer, thanks for the question. Jennifer, what do you do when your heart starts racing? Mine does just thought of having to start a presentation. You're not alone, Jennifer. I think most of us do that. And today my heart was racing a little bit. So like I said earlier, I think the biggest thing you can do is just before it gets, before it's overwhelming, identify it and stop and say, oh, I see you. I see nervousness right there. I have this feeling in my stomach, and acknowledge it and know that it's your body telling you, hey, get ready, right? Then once you know it's there, I mean, like I said, if it's there and you don't have a lot of experience, it's going to be difficult to just, eliminate it right there. So the best thing to do is accept it and know that it's there, but identify it so that it doesn't impede you from presenting. The recommendations that I would give you is, again, accept it, go to the bathroom real quick and take some deep breaths. Don't hyperventilate, don't pass out, but, take some deep breaths, take a couple of deep breaths, think of positive thoughts. I'm going to do great. The people that are there want to learn what I'm having to present. They want to know what I'm presenting. Even if one person gets the message that I'm sharing, that's a win. Think positively, but it's likely that more people are going to think it's a great presentation. But, those negative thoughts start creeping in. So those are the things that I would recommend. I think that the way obviously to really curb nervousness is going to be to just do them more often. The more you practice and the more you do it in front of people, it's going to make you feel more at ease because you'll get more comfortable doing it. That doesn't mean it's going to go away 100%, but that's one way of doing it. But if you don't have all the experience, then what you do is, take a deep breath, take a couple of minutes to do maybe a little bit power posing, go over your notes briefly. I was actually terrible at going over my notes before the presentation. I just couldn't focus, 2-3 minutes before, but it's still good to have a little outline, right? Have notes. It's a lot better to have your note cards and to have an outline than not have anything. That's really important. A lot of people out there will think that having the notes and having the outline or presentation cards in front of you doesn't look good. It's a lot better to have them than to lose your track of your thoughts or where you're going. And then, your nervousness completely goes, crazy. So, but those are some of the things, and I can share a little bit more as we move forward in the Q&A. Let me jump to another question. Pablo says, in digital platforms like Zoom, what's the ideal time your presentation should be, considering many of us are already suffering from Zoom fatigue syndrome? Great. I think more than 50 minutes, more than 55 minutes it's lengthy, right? I have classes that are supposed to last, and hopefully I have classes that are supposed to last 3 hours in Zoom. I can't do 3 hours in Zoom. I do half, and I just give my students a little bit more work to do on their own. It's just very difficult to be in one spot, right? Unless you're watching a movie or something, very, very engaging, and then have popcorn and stuff like that. Then 3 hours, like a 3-hour movie, is still difficult to watch. I haven't watched that movie. What's that Netflix movie that, Al Pacino and all those guys are in? And I saw it 3 hours and a half or something like that. I'm like, no, thank you. It's too long, right? So that's one thing that I would recommend. About an hour is good. And then Sylvia, do you see this organization working for a professional development session? Yes, I think, Sylvia, great question. I think it definitely works for a professional development session, especially for a professional development session or anything that's very informative or how to. It's very good to organize in this manner. Obviously, depending on the length, but typically it's going to be about an hour. If it's like a workshop for a whole day, then you will have multiple, right, 3-point speeches depending on the topic. But each topic would be organized like this, so that people get to follow those 3 points. So very, very good observation. It does work for that. It even works for I would say, got some people joining. It even works for some people. It even works for a wedding speech. It works for an impromptu speech if you want. It would work for, a comedy, stand-up presentation. It works for everything because it basically gives structure to what you're going to talk about. And more often than not, we forget about structure in our presentations, and that's when we go on tangents and so on and so forth. So I'm going to move on a little bit. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And speaking of, look at that. I want to be respectful of time, and look at what we're going to talk about for the next couple of minutes. Time management. Pablo was asking the question about how long. Always think about time management, especially in a Zoom call, especially in a meeting like this. And it's your responsibility as the person that's hosting it, if you're presenting, to keep things on track. So don't be afraid to say, okay, I'm gonna move the presentation on. You know, I'm gonna keep going with what we're talking about, and then say, hey, you know, let's continue. I can answer your questions afterwards, but let's go on with what we're talking about, or let's bring the conversation back to the point at hand. So those are things that you can do to stay on track. It's really important to keep things on track. It's also really easy to lose a meeting. You know, if there's multiple people talking at the same time, and then it's a heated conversation and everybody has things to say, it gets really crazy. And then people are talking about their pet dog a couple of minutes from now, right? So I'll talk a little bit about how to manage the Zoom call or the Zoom meeting to help with that sort of thing. The internal clock, go with your internal clock. If you're feeling like it's a little bit too long, it's going too long. Oh, what happened there? If you feel like it's going on too long, where's my keynote? Oh, did I close it? Oh, it closed my keynote crashed. So if you're feeling like it's just a too long of a presentation, and apologies for that. My presentation crashed, so I'm going to bring it up again and then share it with you guys. There it is. So if you're feeling like the you know, you have an internal clock, so follow it, right? It's gonna tell you, hey, you know, we're going a little bit too far, you know, into this conversation. Let's bring it back. That's going to be something that you're going to feel internally when you're presenting. Some of you are really good at telling stories. I bet some of you, and that's a great skill, especially when presenting and doing this sort of thing, but it can lead you into a very lengthy presentation, right? If you're really good at telling stories, that's great, but know how to bring it back and really get to the point. Use your phone or your device as a stopwatch. I have a little clock right here to my right, but I also have my phone in front of me. So if I need to check the time, you know, keep track of that. That's a very easy thing to do. I always, you know, I used to be very strict with this when my students would present their speeches and say, no, don't use, you know, a stopwatch because you'll get used to it. You know what? It's okay, because everybody was going 5-10 minutes past their time limit. So I said, you know what? It's a lot better to have the time right there, because then you know how much time you have to wrap things up. So use your phone or device as a stopwatch, or just keep track of that. And then always leave time for questions and answers at the end. If it's an hour presentation, leave 10 minutes for that. That's always good, right? And that also is going to make you feel comfortable, because then you don't have to speak for a whole hour. Then you speak for 50 minutes or a little bit less. So let me get to another question, I believe, about time management. It says, how much time you need to prepare? It really depends on the presentation, Alfredo. It depends on the presentation, but I would definitely work, because if somebody says, hey, tomorrow you have to present at lunch, you know, for work on last weekend's conference, you know, you have about 12 hours or less, and you're probably not going to sleep very well, because you have to, you know, if it's a big presentation. So it just depends on when your deadline is, but I would definitely give myself a few days. The first day is preparing what you're going to say, and then the next few days is preparing, just reading it and going over it and rehearsing really the presentation if you can. Actually, I'll give you some of my secrets today. Before I went here live with you guys, I went over my slides a few times. And that helped me just understand kind of where things are in terms of my presentation. So definitely do that. And then Sylvia, another good question. Do you establish the time for brain breaks, or do you gauge the needs? No, I usually, one of the things that I like to do is tell people in advance, hey, we're going to have, you know, a break. If it's a 2-hour meeting, we're going to have a 5-minute break in the middle. So, you know, if you have to use the restroom, you know, just wait a little bit, you know, we'll have that 5-minute break. And especially when it's something more than an hour. If it's an hour, I don't do breaks. But if it's more than an hour, I definitely recommend saying, sometimes what I would do is like, everybody okay? Does anybody need a break? And then gauge the audience. You want to maybe also allow them to respond, because some people are really engaged, right? So it's all about that feedback you get. If you're in this type of platform that you would ask, can you guys let me know if anybody needs a 5-minute break? You know, we're about an hour into this presentation. Please in the chat box say yes or no, if you're good. You know, just get feedback, because you're not going to be able to read them if they have their cameras off, and so on and so forth. So definitely I would say ask if you can. Chris, comment just real quick. I find it easier to present and connect with a live audience. You can see you can see facial cues, people leaning in, etc. Any tips for connecting with an audience on Zoom and versus in person? Yes, I'll get to that, Chris. So give me a couple of minutes, because we're going to get to that before we wrap things up. That's one of the most important things that I want to share with you. Some of the things that you can do in a structured presentation is that's precisely, and I'll get to that. So I'll answer your question in a couple of minutes, but that's a really good question. And glad you brought it up because I will address that in a second. But always leave time for questions. So let me move on because it's specifically, what I wanted to talk to you guys about, in the Zoom presentation or in a Google meeting or Google Meet, whatever platform it is, you want to take control of the room. Don't be afraid to be the commander. I know that comes difficult to some of us that are more introverted or introverts. But really, you want to take control of the room. You want to set some guidelines at the beginning and say, hi, everybody. If you noticed, I gave you some guidelines at the beginning of this presentation. I said what was going on. I give you a little bit of what to expect, even before I said hello, right? You want to tell people right out of the gate, this is how it's going to go. We're going to have, if it's a 2-hour thing, like I said, say, in 50 minutes, we're going to have a 5-minute break. So don't stress out. If you need to go to the bathroom, just do it quietly or whatever, whatever you need to say. Mute your microphones. Be careful to mute your microphones when you're in this classroom or in this meeting, so on and so forth. All those things are going to be important. You want to set some guidelines for the meeting. Take control again of this presentation or of this meeting. You are the ringleader. You are going to be the person that everybody's looking to. And I don't want to make you feel more nervous, but just feel confident and feel good that you can actually say, okay, I want to bring in the conversation back to this point, right? It does, obviously you want to do it respectfully and tell people, hey, that's a great point. Let's bring it back to this topic now, right? So you want to, set some guidelines. You want to take control of the room. That comes with experience, but it doesn't mean you can't do it and can try it out the next presentation that you have on Zoom. Oh, sorry about that. Oh. So take control of the room, set guidelines, establish expectations. I'm going to have questions at the end, whatever it is that you need to tell people so that they know that they're doing good. And then you're the ringleader. That's what I was telling. So be confident that you can do that. Don't worry about hurting people's feelings. Just do it, very politely. Hey, we need to, continue talking about this. Here it is. Here's what you can do. Here's some tips for you guys about nonverbal communication and engaging the audience in a Zoom presentation or in a PowerPoint presentation or on camera. I have that young lady in the bathrobe because raise your hand if you've been in a Zoom meeting or in a presentation like this and somebody is in their bathrobe or somebody is just not dressed appropriately. My recommendation is to, dress the part if you're presenting. If you don't want to dress up, then don't have your screen up because it's very distracting even to the presenter. I've had students that were laying in bed, almost falling asleep, and the camera was on. That was very distracting, right? I heard a horror story. Was it Raquel that you mentioned that story about somebody in a bathrobe, presenting someone with foil in their hair? Raquel, thank you for sharing that. For me, it's hard to stop people when they have a question or comment. Yeah, that's hard, Pablo. But yeah, the towel in their hair or foil, or there's always somebody that's not going to be. It's kind of like in the classroom. Sometimes I'm a little bit old school, but I find it hard to have people in pajamas in the classroom and so on and so forth. But it's not that bad. But you want to dress up as if you're going out of the house. Now that's not going to work for some people because they might dress very differently outside than inside. But anyway, eye contact. It's very difficult to make eye contact in a Zoom meeting. As you notice, my camera is coming from the top, so I'm not able to always be looking at the camera. But when you're trying to make a point, it's a good exercise to look at the camera and say, you know what, guys? And if you're looking at the video right now, I'm looking right at you. I'm trying to get this point across because I'm looking at the camera, right? If I'm looking this way, it's not going to be as engaging as me looking at this. So you know what, guys? This is a lot better. When I thank you, I'm probably going to do this. I'm going to look at the camera, not look at the slides. But this is going to be something that's really important in speaking in front of, in a Zoom presentation. It's difficult to do. So if you can have your camera close to your slides, that's going to make it a lot easier. But always be mindful about eye contact. We need to establish eye contact to be engaged with others, right? Obviously, you don't want to, connect with someone. If you're in person, it's that whole thing where if you're in an elevator, you don't want to look at people in the eye because it's going to be weird. It's weird even in the supermarket. But when you're, presenting or talking to somebody, you definitely want to make eye contact. You definitely want to smile a little bit, especially, show that you're enjoying presenting to the audience. Smile, make a few jokes here and there. That's part of the enthusiasm for what you're doing. The camera angle, I mentioned that's going to be, difficult to manage, but, it's something that you need to think about. Your background, notice my background. I'm going to tell this room has a bunch of junk, but I said, I can't show the junk to the class, right? In my class. So I have a little camera there. I got some lighting in the background. I got another light over here on my top right. It just makes it look a lot better. And I got my microphone here. It makes it look a lot better. And then I got a front light as well to light my face, right? If you've ever been in a Zoom call where the person is hard to see, it's just not going to be very engaging. People are just going to tune you out. They're going to go somewhere else. The way that you would engage people, going back to Chris's question, is every slide or every other slide, ask a question to raise hands, right? Can you guys, use the chat box? And this is where I'm going, I guess, this is right here. This is the next slide. I'm about ready to finish up with these technical considerations. Think about lighting and audio. I mentioned that. Create simple slides. I'm going to show you a slide right now. Simple slides. Less is better. I don't know if you've seen presentations, and I know some of you have because we've been in some of the same meetings. You see some presentations and it's just full of text. You can't read the text. Nobody's going to read a whole paragraph, right? So it's very difficult to read a whole presentation like that. It's going to be very difficult to read a whole presentation. It's very difficult to read a whole, to a whole paragraph. And it's just important to know, that less is better. So let me see. There we go. It's just important to know that less is better in terms of presentations like this. So simple slides, have images in your slides. It's a lot more engaging. People like pictures. There's a reason why pop-up books in magazines do a lot better than regular books. We like images. So have images. Just look at the slides that I've shown you today. They have very beautiful images. And there's resources out there on the internet that you can go to. One of them, if you want to take note, is unsplash.com. Unsplash.com has beautiful images, high resolution that you can use in your PowerPoints, and you don't have to worry about copyright. And there's all sorts of images there. So, that's one resource that you can use. And it's, they have education, they have work, they have business images, they have all sorts of stuff, beautiful landscapes, whatever you need, and you can do that. So simple is better for you guys. Let me figure out my screen right here. Yes, Unsplash is also an app, so or there's an app for it as well. Nonverbal communication is talking about that. Ask questions each slide. That's what I was mentioning. Be engaged with the audience. Just because they don't have the pictures up doesn't mean you can't address or directly ask questions to them, right? You can, if you want to even go further, you can say, "Hey, Alfredo, what do you think about this?" And then Alfredo's gonna be like, "Holy crap, I need to be, paying attention," or just mention people by their name and just be engaged, because you don't have the eye-to-eye contact sometimes, and you're not gonna have that personal interaction, that person-to-person interaction. So you have to do it verbally. You have to maybe every other slide, say, "Hey, raise your hand if you've been in a situation where you felt nervous," or raise your hand if you did that, right? This is the best way of keeping people engaged. Also, ask people to have their opinion on the chat box. That's another way of doing it. So use the tools that you have, use the features, that point right there, use the features that you have to engage the audience so that you have that communication with everybody, right? So you have that engagement. And then, acknowledge people when they join. If they're joining late, say hi to people and say, "Oh, that's a great background, Joaquin." Actually, it's not, it's very dark, but I'm just kidding. But that sort of stuff. Say jokes, and just engage the audience. Do whatever you would do in a person situation. And then, like I said, ask questions each slide. So those are some of the things that you can definitely do. So just to review real quick, what you learned in the past 45 minutes is, we understood, or hopefully now you have a better understanding of nervousness in digital platforms, why it's difficult, right? Why it's more challenging to present with a digital platform. For some of you, it might be easier, which is great. Congratulations, you're a step ahead of everybody else. But now we know a little bit why the nervousness happens in digital platforms, and really why it happens generally just in front of an audience. And also, we talked a little bit about the 3-point organization, and some of these points, just like I said earlier, I can't get too much into it and really just break it down. This is why, I would encourage you guys to stay connected and just, be on the list, because I will do workshops maybe twice a month and talk about the organization and that sort of stuff, a little bit more in depth, kind of organize certain things a certain way. And then finally, we talked about presenting in the digital world, some of the challenges that you might have with presentations in the digital world. So really, public speaking is all about having that courage to go for it. If you're in camera or if you're doing a presentation, you just go for it and do it. And then kind of adjust on the way, right? All the things that you're learning today, and this, hopefully you learned something in this presentation, in this workshop, some of these things you can actually put into work and practice and remember these things. The one thing that you really just need to tap is your courage and just saying, I'm going to go for it. And that's going to help you accomplish all these things. And it's going to make things, a little bit easier. So I want to share real quick that I'm going to have a Speaking with Courage course coming up in a few weeks. Is going to start July 7th. So I didn't want to start before 4th of July so that you guys don't, miss out on any barbecue. And hopefully we can barbecue and do all that stuff pretty soon. So Speaking with Courage, the course is going to start, and you can, visit the website, and I'll share about that as we move forward. And thank you for being on my list, because it was very encouraging to see that there are, individuals like you guys out there that want to enhance their public speaking skills, and that you understand the importance of being a better speaker, right? Because of the things that you can accomplish with it. But my course is going to be an online course, much like this. It's going to be kind of like a hybrid course. So I would say a hybrid course, but it's going to be an 8-week course. And I can share that, like, if you want to, talk to me about it, I can share more information about it. I'll just go really briefly through it, because I want to leave some time for questions. It's going to be one-on-one. It's going to have some one-on-one coaching aspects of it. I'm going to teach you body language, how to use body language to be more engaging. I'm going to help you with that message organization and effective messaging techniques, depending on your audience, understanding your audience and all those things. We're going to do some on-camera and digital platform training, and it's going to be live. A lot of these is going to be live, so you have opportunities to present in front of the group in the classroom, in this type of classroom. So I know some of you are going to be like, oh, I don't want to do, well, this is how you get better, right? Just go for it. But anyway, I'm going to teach you how to reduce nervousness. I'm going to help you with that. I'm going to go more in depth and talk about other tips and tricks that we can do. And then finally, my classes hopefully are only going to be 12 people or a 12-person class, so that we can actually, learn or be more effective in the learning process. But that's going to be hopefully in a few weeks. And if you're on my email list, you'll get those notifications. But basically, what's going to happen is I'll continue doing these workshops. Like I said, at the beginning of the workshop today, I mentioned that the next one is June 23rd. I believe it's Tuesday, June 23rd. So mark your calendar. It's going to be how to be a more persuasive speaker, and not necessarily to change, a whole group at a time, but how to maybe be a better negotiator as well in certain things, how to get how to be persuasive when you're asking for a raise or negotiating something, but also how to be persuasive when selling things if you're in a business, or when you're trying to get people to support your organization, or to join your group, or to join your church, or to join you in just accomplishing things as a group. I'm going to teach you certain skills in that workshop as well. So there's my contact information. Go ahead and check out my website, humbertogurmilan.com. I'm very proud. I worked on it, throughout the whole quarantine. And then that's my email. You're always welcome to email me with your questions. Like I said, if you have questions about today, or if you have questions later on that you want to get answered before a presentation or before recording a video for your business or whatever, hit me up. I'm always happy to do that. That's why I'm doing it. I'm very passionate. I love teaching, like I said, and I love, sharing that with you guys. But again, next workshop in a few weeks. So I'm, grateful again for you being here, and I'll see you in the next workshop. Thank you, guys.